So, 10k subscribers, I just want to say thank you guys and the 3 girls. Thank you so much for making this a reality and taking the time out of your day to waste your time watching my dumb videos. I know a lot of YouTubers often thank their viewers for giving them a platform, and I want to make a slight distinction. Thank you for being my platform. The only reason I stand out in any capacity at all is because you guys have decided to put me on your shoulders, and I really value that. Like I've said many times, YouTube is a hobby for me, but where our interests align, I will always endeavor to create something of value.
What makes me horny?
So anyways, a quick aside, I used some of my art in a previous video, and I'm very much a beginner in this space. I'm very aware of where I'm at, and even though I'm not a professional, a lot of you guys in the comments are professional artists, and you gave me a lot of great advice. So this is how it looked in the video, and this is how it looks after following your advice. Okay, but for real, before we do that, I just wanted to share a little bit about myself and my gaming journey. But I started writing everything down and I realized 2 things. One is that I am ancient. I mean, I played Rogue on a laptop that didn't even have a hard drive. It had a floppy disk drive and you had to load MS-DOS into the RAM, eject the floppy disk, and then put in the floppy disk with the application you wanted to run to then run through command line. That's how I played Rogue. The other thing I realized is that this would be a really long video. It would be like 8 hours long. No one has time for that. Instead, I'm going to cherry pick a few games that I played, and I'm going to choose the PlayStation era. And there's a few reasons for this. One of the reasons is that I was a teenager in the PlayStation era, so I have really great memories of it. And the other reason is that I wanted to compare with something that has really bad technical specs in comparison to what we have today. The PlayStation had a 32-bit chip that ran at 34 megahertz and 2 megabytes of RAM with a whole additional megabyte for video processing. And yeah, at the time that was great, but I wanted to highlight that disparity before we compare it to games today. Now here's the question. Have I gone back to play these games now that I'm older to take off the rose-tinted glasses? No. Are you retarded? Why would I go back and ruin my perfect memories from when I was 14 with the perspective of an old man that's balding? I know what will happen. Like, how do people say that games are about escapism in one breath, and then in the next breath they're like, but don't forget all the bad things? So I don't know, I think that's the point. You're supposed to forget about the rough edges. The whole hobby is about pretending something is real when it's not. Anyways, you don't have to agree with my perspective on that, and it's not really going to affect the outcome of this video in any way, but it's just something to know. Now, the first game I want to focus on here is the original Medal of Honor. Do you remember this one? It's actually really hard to put in perspective just how influential Saving Private Ryan was to the whole media landscape. In fact, Medal of Honor was one of Steven Spielberg's passion projects. Anyways, remember this, 3 megabytes of RAM. The controls were so bad that you pretty much always needed to manual aim, and the enemies would stop and aim and shoot at you as well, because I think it would end up being unfair if they didn't. On top of that, you had all the technical limitations of the hardware itself. But what was so cool about Medal of Honor, and the reason why I remember it, is that if you shot a soldier in the foot, they would start hopping on one leg. If you shot their helmet, the helmet would fly off and they would try and pick it up again. If you threw a grenade, one of 3 things might happen. They might try to pick it up and throw it back at you, or kick it at you. They might try to run away, or they might even try to jump onto the grenade to save their friends. That's cool. Even the dogs, if you threw a grenade at a dog, it would bring it back to you because it thought you were playing fetch with it. There were so many things that they did with the soldiers that made them seem like they had a lot of character. Again, 3 megabytes of RAM in 1999. No motion capture, no DLSS, no UE5, none of it. And yet it still kind of puts a lot of games that are coming out today to shame. Like in most shooters in 2024, you're shooting the enemy and wherever you're hitting them, it's sort of just vibrating and they just continue moving in whatever direction they were moving and they just keep firing at you. It's like there's never even an attempt to make it seem like they're aware of what's happening to them. Oh, here's a good one for Halo Studios. They managed to do split screen. So I don't know, maybe you can call someone that worked in the gaming industry in 1999 and they can give you some pointers. Now, I don't think that every game should seek out to make all of the enemies very immersive. That's not the point of what I'm saying. I don't think every game should be doing this. My point is that I believe that limitations often breeds innovation. And more importantly, innovations are often born out of this creative necessity in an attempt to overcome these limits, rather than coming out of a need to create something to market to players. Obviously, these two things can align. You can innovate to overcome a limitation and market that innovation. But I do think that you can tell which one had the higher weighting within the studio when you look at them in retrospect. Like a common one is game world size or map size. Dragon Age Inquisition, or more recently Starfield, are shining examples of how innovations that are centered around marketing don't mean anything. The second game I wanted to talk about is Monster Rancher 2. And I'll be honest, after playing Monster Rancher 2, games like Pokemon lost a lot of shine for me. It's one of the reasons I want more games like Power World to come out, because I feel like Pokemon needs to pull their fingers out of their asses in terms of the mainline games. Maybe they can steal from another Dragon Quest game or something. Anyways, Monster Rancher 2 plays like, well, it's in the name. You run a farm where you take care of monsters, you feed them, you train them, and then you take them into the arena to battle. But the cool thing that I really loved about it is how you got the monsters in the first place. And the way it was done in Monster Rancher 2 is that you would extract monsters from the CDs that you had in your house. So if you were around in the 90s or the early 2000s, you probably remember your family having this tower CD rack where your dad would keep his alternate 70s music collection.
You like Huey Lewis in the news?
And then going and raiding that tower for all the CDs, and you would put it in front of the PlayStation. You would go to extract a monster. The game would tell you to take the disc out, and you would put one of these CDs into the PlayStation, and it would read the information and it would generate a monster from that. That was so badass. I was being groomed for gacha by proxy and I didn't even know it. Now, this is a fun little gimmick, but I do think it's a really cool way to think beyond the hardware and beyond the buttons, not just to make the game fun, but to think of what the player already has around the house and using it as an accessory to enhance that experience. You know, it just took something from your house that's really mundane and boring and said, well, wait, there's monsters inside of these. Your house became a treasure hunt. And that was really cool because it also meant that different people had different experiences unless you went out and bought all the CDs. And I will say that a lot of people will say, okay, but what if you didn't have a lot of CDs in your house? You could always breed monsters as well though, so there was a way to get more than what you might have in your house anyways. Now, the best thing about all of this for most people that bought the game is that you didn't have to earn anything or buy anything to extract monsters. You didn't have to buy proprietary toys like in Skylander. It was just the developer saying, hey, imagine your house is full of monsters and you can collect them. First Monster Rancher game came out in 1997, by the way. Now again, I think this comes from a creative desire to think beyond the limits of the PlayStation. It's a way of making the game bigger than the gray box in front of the TV. In a way, it was kind of like Pokemon Go before Pokemon Go. But I really do feel like in 2024, if this game was made now, it would be made with the perspective of, okay, how do we get it so that the player has to pay to extract a monster, and how do we get it so that they want to do that?
Players can now purchase the Trader's Gilded Brutosaur, which offers auction house and a mail service. And mail?
Because from a 2024 perspective, it really feels like Monster Rancher 2 was foolishly generous. Maybe it was. Maybe that's why we don't have too many new ones. It feels like we've been fed this false perception that you cannot make money and be generous. Or maybe you could do it in the past, but now you can't do it. That's not even true. You can just look at Stellar Blade. Stellar Blade was a full-priced game that released. You got about half of the outfits from playing through the game. You got about 80 outfits in total. And then as a free update, they did a boss rush mode, they did even more outfits, and then after that, they made a summer event where they released another outfit. And this is mostly after release. It's insane to me that in 2024, a gacha studio of all places is the one that is setting the new standard for what players should expect. And by comparison, we have some studios in 2024 that complain that gamers expect too much by expecting the game to work and not be buggy.
And because Ubisoft knows that you're going to wait for a sale, almost certainly, they're not going to bother polishing the game immediately because they can spend an extra month or two after launch polishing it since you're just going to wait for a sale anyways.
It's crazy to me how those perspectives have changed over time. Stellar Blade was really popular. I think Generosity works exactly as it did in 1999 and before that. It seems crazy to me that these time-tested virtues are suddenly being challenged as if they're not possible anymore. Okay, we're going to talk about the next game that did something cool to think beyond the gray box on the floor. You guys should all know this one, Metal Gear Solid. And in particular, I'm talking about the boss fight, Psycho Mantis. For me, this is one of the most memorable boss fights of all time. So for those of you that didn't experience it, or maybe you forgot somehow, Psycho Mantis is obviously psychic, and the first thing that he tries to do is he tries to prove to you that he has psychic powers.
Now let me read your mind.
And to do that, the game reads your memory card, it looks at your game save file, it also looks at the other game save files.
Oh, you like sweet cotton.
And then Psycho Mantis will chastise you one way or another.
You are either very cautious or you are a coward.
And funnily enough, if you remove the memory card, he'll actually say, oh, I can't read your mind, it's clean. And then the next thing he'll do is he'll tell you to put the controller down, and the controller will start vibrating like crazy and start moving around. And then after that, he'll start cheating by reading your player inputs.
I've got it. Use the controller port. Plug your controller into controller port 2. If you do that, he won't be able to read your mind.
Something to remember is that breaking the fourth wall wasn't super common in video games at that point, but also there's a very big difference between Deadpooling your way through the fourth wall and just talking at the player, and breaking the fourth wall in a way that makes you double take and almost think, maybe he does have psychic powers. He just moved my controller, holy shit. And that's what made Psycho Mantis such a cool character.
Oh, hurry, make love to me. Snake, I won't.
Having Psycho Mantis interact in that way was far more impactful than if the game had better graphics or anything like that. This is obviously a one and done trick. You can't go back and experience this again. Also, I don't think it even works if you haven't experienced it and you try to go and experience it now, because it required you to have a 1999 perspective of what technology could do to then be excited about that limitation being broken. But I think that makes it even more impressive as an immersive tool because the developer went out of their way to do something that only worked once, but it was so cool that you'll remember it forever. And I do feel like nowadays, we only really think of immersion as VR. And VR is such a side grade. I mean, VR is really good at some things, but it's often antagonistic to the premise of the fantasy of video games. My brother in Christ, I already know I'm a loser. I play video games so I can feel awesome and capable, not to be reminded that I'm unathletic. But it does make me wonder if maybe we've lost something along the way. We see VR as the only way to achieve an immersion beyond the box. And as far as I know, I don't think people really try to do this anymore. But maybe I'm wrong, I haven't played every game in the world. Let me know in the comments. Okay, last one. I'm going to use an example that is actually in the game this time, I promise. I love this game so much. I think it was the first game that I played where I had to choose between two characters, where you went with one girl and you would end up on one side of a political conflict, and you went with another girl, you would end up on the other side of that political conflict. But basically, Front Mission 3 was a grid-based mecha RPG with secret government organizations and a really cool political story. But the thing that I found so cool about Front Mission 3 is that it had a fake internet. So you could open a browser window and then browse a couple of pages, go back and forth. So as you progress through the game, you would find these secrets and passwords, you would go back to these websites and then hack them. It was such a small thing with such a big impact that just kept me enthralled in the world and wanting to learn more. Again, 3 megabytes of RAM, and they did something that meant more to me personally than 30 Overwatch hero shorts. And that's because I was discovering it for myself. I felt like I had agency, and I felt like something that I could really do. Like, I think it was only a year later that I got banned for life from this one forum for my bullshit. Now imagine this for a minute. Imagine the next Mass Effect game and going to whatever the equivalent of the Citadel would be, and then going to a terminal and then browsing the internet of the world that you exist in Mass Effect. That would be so badass. Especially if you could hack into certain websites and then get information from them. And by hacking, I don't mean holding X for 2.5 seconds. Fuck you, Destiny.
Press and hold the button, and the more valuable the piece of gear, the longer you have to hold
And
it.
I don't know, but I have to ask, why does it feel like in 1999, games were so ambitious and asking you to imagine more than what they were even able to represent? And when I compare that to my experiences in 2024, it's almost like we have everything and the developers are begging us to imagine less. For me, video games are a way to dream while you're awake. I've had so many good video game experiences in the past, and I will continue to keep having really awesome video game experiences in the future. I am not of the perspective that gaming is dying and innovation is dead. All you have to do is look at the indie scene and the AA scene for that. But I am going to ask one question. Baldur's Gate 3 came out in 2023, and it shocked the whole world that a Dungeons & Dragons turn-based RPG could be so popular. It's like the entire world agreed that there was a particular frame for how to make a game good, how to make it popular, how games should work, how games shouldn't work, and if you don't follow this meta, you are somehow leaving money on the table and making this big mistake. And when you consider how homogenized our good game ideas and bad game ideas have become over the years, I have to say that I kind of just feel like an alien. What a strange way to think, when there is so much evidence that proves that a formula alone doesn't drive success in a video game. I wonder if it's become too easy, maybe too safe, or maybe too calculated. Sometimes I think that we have so much data, and where you get your data from is really important, by the way. So much data guiding our decisions that we don't take the time to challenge ourselves, that we don't take the time to seek out those accidental moments of genius. And I wonder if that's why many studios never seem to think for themselves or seldom impress anyone. I personally think it's very simple. Have a dream and then listen to your audience. I mean, authentically listen to your audience and figure out what their dream is. And then find where your two dreams align. And then authentically search for how to connect your dream with their dream. And I think if that is the beginning point for everything that you're doing, everything else is secondary. Because let's say you don't have a skill set. Well, then you're either going to pursue that skill set or you're going to hire someone that does have that skill set. And you look at it and you think, does this align my dream with the dream of the audience? And if the answer is no, you're going to tear it down and start again.
We probably had anywhere between 15 and 22 people working on the drag tentacle at any time. And I remember, people coming in and asking me, Glenn, are you sure you really want to do this? We cut 2 other things just to get that in. I can't tell you what we cut because I don't care, right? That drag tentacle was really cool.
That is the art part of gaming, and journalists really harp on about the art part of gaming, but it's also a product. It's both of those things. And if you have that perspective, it's like, well, if it's not a good product, then you're not really connecting your dreams. So the art part totally fails. And of course, even if you are doing this, of course you'll have failures. You're not perfect, but maybe you learn something from the first attempt, and then you do the next one and it gets closer. And then maybe you take the lessons from that one and you get closer. You definitely still see this in AA and indie gaming in 2024, but it does seem to be a shrinking perspective. And when I think about it, the further back you go in the gaming industry, the harder it was to inauthentically engage in the gaming space. It was not as popular before. The hardware limitations were difficult to overcome, and there just wasn't as much money in it. All of these limitations made the barrier to entry so high that you really needed to want it to get there. Now, don't get it twisted, there's always been money involved in video games, but I think that getting that money was harder to do. You had to work harder to get it. You had to innovate past the limitations of what you were working with. And in many ways, I think of it like this. everyone that learns to swim drank pool water. And I think in 1999, the struggles of making a video game were very much real struggles. They were imposed by the hardware, they were imposed by the money. When I feel like in 2024, all the obstacles in gaming are artificially created. They're always management problems, they're convoluted financial schemes, they're political barriers, none of which are real problems to innovate past. Anyways, the reason why I brought this all up was not to reminisce and say that 1999 was such a better time. I played The Fifth Element. There were so many shit games as well. There's always been bad games, but I do think that there has been a shift in perspective, and I'm really passionate about video games in that sense. I know that people will throw me in one camp or another depending on what I say in a video, but this is the heart of what I love about video games, and it's the reason why I make videos trying to protect the authenticity of the hobby. Anyways, that's just my perspective. There's some goober across the ocean from you, so have a good one, and I'll catch you later in the comments. Bye.